All right, welcome everybody to the Life Between All or Nothing with Scott J.
And I'm Mary Kay.
And I think there we go. And my internet, unfortunately, crashing. So this ought to be an interesting show today because I'm sure
Yeah,
Mary Kay's only catching about every third word that I'm saying at best.
yeah, I'm catching every
My
third word.
lovely, yes, my lovely Comcast cable is crashing when I have the high speed cable, and their advertisements are not accurate. I will tell you this though. In the office tomorrow all day, I am going to be trying to switch my cable service and my internet service because I'm tired of this. Tired every night at 7 o'clock, my internet dies. But anyway,
Yeah, must be all your
let's see.
neighbors. Your neighbors are hogging.
This I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but it's just it's
That's okay.
frustrating. It's
We'll get through
frustrating.
it. I'll guess. I'll
Yes,
guess
we
what
will.
you're
Just
saying. Oh,
our
hey,
buddy
Geo. I see
Justin,
Geo popping up. Hi.
Geo is with us. We were just talking about Jacques. He's saying, "What's up, peeps?"
Jacques. Hi.
No, don't say peeps because it's close to Easter, and I don't eat peeps.
Oh my God.
Do you like? Do you eat those things? Those Easter peeps? Do you eat those?
If it's sweet, I eat it.
They're so gross, though. They are so gross. That's like candy corn. That's terrible.
I love candy corn.
Jack says me
I know.
either.
I'm a weirdo.
Yeah. Let's see.
Oh
Quick
boy.
updates. I know we did a recorded show last week, and I know some people tuned in for that. So thank you very much for tuning in for our recorded show, which was actually we had a lot of fun doing it, but we miss having the interaction. So it's
Yeah,
good to
we
be
re- we
live
really
again.
did miss that.
Live is like
We thanks to everybody who left comments on the recorded show. I think it
yes.
was Jock that was trying to figure out whether we were live or not, wondering why we weren't acknowledging anyone. Oops.
Listen, I probably should have a banner up saying pre-recorded on the shows like that, so people don't
Yeah,
get. I don't want
next
people to
time.
get like bad feelings, like we're ignoring them. You know.
Yeah,
Um, there's
yeah.
Karen Hurley.
Hi,
Karen Hurley.
Karen.
And Jacques says, "Stop picking on me, Mary Kay." Hey, the night is young, Jacques. We're going to be picking on you. Don't worry. Uh,
He
just
picks on
kidding.
me. He wants me to say the word about.
About. Sorry, Jacques. It's
About.
about time
It's all
you grew
about.
up and get over yourself. All right. And hey, none other than Sandy Mom is with us. Hi, you
Hi,
two.
Sandy Mom.
All right. Anyway, so we did it. We were last week. We did the pre-recorded show because my daughter was in town. I got to spend a week with my daughter, and the show was
Awesome.
on personal time, personal care, and taking time for yourself. And I did that last week.
Yeah.
And I went on a gator boat ride with the kids, with my daughter and her wife, and went on gator boat rides, and we did a bunch of stuff together. It was really nice. And then I've spent the beginning of this week in lovely, beautiful downtown Cincinnati, Ohio.
Ooh,
But met
what
some
were
of the
you doing
most
there?
important. We were training people. Karen and I, with Addiction Training Center, went up. We were training people to be interventionists and to do other things and help with
Nice.
addiction. And we met wonderful people. I'm going to tell you right now. Never been to Cincinnati before, but it's going on my checklist as a great place to be because the people were so fabulous, wonderful people.
Nice. That's great to hear.
And I think we trained 70 people in the room. I think it was a 70-person class, and
Wow.
I might have hugged every one of the 70 people. It was that cool.
Oh, lucky
It
you.
was one of those great
Lucky them.
neat things, and we've already got people contacting us. We're certainly going to be up there again, but anyway, just that's the quick Reader's Digest update. So all the other shows, back on track for next week, and for Scott and Lynn and the X's on Wednesday night. We got lots of crimes to talk about, so many other things,
Awesome.
but back. And so what have you been up to this past week? Because we haven't really chatted that much because I've been traveling.
Well, I've had a really busy week. I have I just found out from an author friend of mine that so I met this woman online. Oh, I saw Catherine. Hi, Catherine. I
Yes,
met this woman
Catherine saying hi,
online.
Scott and Mary.
Her name is Rachel Wine. Her name's Rachel Weinstock, and she is a bullying prevention expert, and she's also a teacher in and around Toronto. So a few years ago during COVID, me reaching out to people and just getting to know people online, because when we couldn't leave our houses, I met her, and she found out that I was a writer. And long story short, because I could go on forever about Rachel. She wrote this book, and she was writing this book in the midst of writing this book, and she asked me and a whole bunch of other people too to be contributors to her book. So it's now been published. It's available on Amazon, and it's a #1 bestseller in one of the categories. And she's like number 600 and something for all of Amazon. And we haven't even done the book launch yet.
Wow.
So it's like, wow. Yeah. The book is called Be
That's
Who You Needed.
Be Who You Needed. I like that.
Be Who
I
You
like that.
Needed. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's what,
That's
you know what? That's what we're doing. You, me, and a lot of other people that we know and we're connected with, we are being the person that we needed back then, maybe a few times in our life. And so now we're making sure that the people that we come into contact with have that person to, a safe place. So yeah, exciting news. Yay.
That's fantastic. I'm so happy for you. Jacques says he's friends with Rachel as well, and that she is
awesome. Yeah, she's
she
a
is
beautiful,
awesome.
beautiful soul.
Well, you know what? I got to tell you, Mary Kay, you over the last 6 months, so many great things you've started to put yourself into, and it manifesting good things happen, and you're making it happen, and it's amazing to watch. I'm so happy for you in all these areas. What does it feel like to really start to, you've been seeing it and projecting it. Now now you're all doing. How does it feel?
You glitched, so I didn't catch the last part of your question.
I guess it's saying you went from projecting and thinking about and wanting to do all these things, and now you're actually doing all those things. How does that feel now in your life?
To doing. Oh, yeah. It feels amazing. And the projecting part, the part of getting really clear on my vision, that hasn't stopped. So I'm continuing to do the projecting and the visualizing and seeing things for my future. And in between there, I'm doing the doing. And it just feels amazing. And you know what? It builds upon itself. So you make small changes, you do small actions, and then they stack. And not only is it great to see my progress if I look at everything on a timeline, but also it generates motivation, right? So
right.
I don't have to worry about being motivated because I'm creating it myself, even just by looking at my progress. So yeah, it feels awesome.
Wow. See, you are becoming your own starter pistol, your own motivation, your own, because you look at today. What can I do tomorrow? I mean, it's just that's awesome.
Yeah. Or what silly thing haven't I done yet? That's one of my questions. What silly thing haven't I done yet? Oh, I'm going to try that. So skydiving is not on that list and never will be. But yeah.
Well, like I said, I have no interest in skydiving. I'm more interested in sky landing. The landing part is what I'm really interested in. And I could jump in the air and do that. I don't have to do that from an airplane. So I'm good. I'm good.
Airplanes. Yeah. We don't need to jump out of them.
Speaking of airplanes, I want to thank the airline industry for coming up with a calculation about what the human ass fits into in a seat. It's amazing how small they make the seats now. I'm not sure who
Oh
they
my God.
measured. Maybe it was that model Twiggy from the 70s where they said, oh, she
Oh
could fit
my
in this
God.
seat. Normal human beings cannot sit in airline seats. It's ridiculous. It's unbelievable. I feel like
Oh
cattle
my
being
God.
flown across the country, shoved into a. It is, and you get to walk past first class on your way back there to the mass of humanity that you're just stuck in. And I'm like, I had a window seat on one flight, and I couldn't even lean against the window because there was a little
Oh my
thing that
God.
kind of stuck out. And so now I'm like crammed. I spent a 2-hour flight with my arm in the air like this because I had no place to put it.
No.
Yeah. So
Wow. They
the day
must be
when I did
using people my size to measure.
oh my God, I have no idea.
Hmm.
I have no idea.
Hmm.
I don't know who designed airline seats, but my guess is it's some pissed off guy with scoliosis who did it. Because these
Oh
are
my God.
not natural position seats, and it was just that's it. I'm not going to complain about it anymore. I always get the aisle seats.
Oh
I always get
boy.
the aisle seats, and then I spend half. I do the one cheek sneak where I got one cheek on the seat, and the rest of me is hanging in the aisle, and that's where I prefer to be. All right.
Oh, you're so
So,
cheeky.
I, all right. Well, you know what? We're talking about all these good things that you're doing and stuff, and and like I said, Karen and I and ATC and in our nonprofit, One Brother One Sister, we're accomplishing a lot of what we want to accomplish. But there's many,
Hmm.
many years where I didn't get anything done. And I was hampered by many, many things: anxiety, fear, depression, addiction, certainly mental health issues. And when we say mental health issues, it doesn't mean that you have a mental illness. It just means that mentally you're not the healthiest. Okay. There's a
Hmm.
lot of things that were hampering me. Trauma being one of them, and not recognizing what trauma
Hmm.
is. And let's get rid of the first myth, first of all. You don't have to be in an exploding building or on a battlefield to experience trauma. Isn't that right, Mary Kay?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So trauma is defined. I mean, we can just generally define it as a wound, and it's an inner wound. It's going to shape our thoughts and our behaviors, but it can also manifest itself physically in physical
Right.
illness as well. And we'll go through some of the signs later to where people can evaluate themselves as maybe could this be a sign of trauma? Um,
Right.
yeah, and it's universal. It's not something that's confined to a certain group of people or a certain country or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is completely universal. And it doesn't occur. We can't put it in a neat little box. I mean, um, even PTSD is now being redefined in a whole new way because it used to be that used to be a term really for military more than anything else.
Yeah.
And then it started maybe first responders started getting counted in that. And then it was like extreme cases of watching a murder happen or something like that. There was the PTSD.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to recognize it's I can only put it this way, maybe to try to explain it. You're right. Mary Kate said a great word. It's a wound. It's a
Hmm.
wound to your brain and your mental health and who you are. It's a wound. It's not a wound like a broken bone, but it is. And a broken bone can occur in many ways. Somebody can break their arm by getting hit by a car or skydiving and landing wrong, or they can break a bone by falling off a motorcycle or a bicycle. Those are standard ways to break a bone. Some people can actually slip in the tub and break a bone. That's something that looks very simple and it's not a big deal. Fall on the steps and break a bone. Sometimes strenuous use of your arm, you can actually get a hairline fracture and break a bone. You can get a wound in many different ways.
Hmm.
Trauma is the same thing. It doesn't have to be what you think of as the big trauma. It could be any little thing that just you react a certain way to it and it creates a trauma or a wound in your mental health and psyche. So don't limit yourself. Don't limit trauma to saying, well, nothing bad ever happened to me, so I have no trauma. Well, have you ever had your heart broken? Because that could be a trauma. Have you been fired from a job? That could be a trauma. Have you witnessed something bad? Or have you had repeated small incidences that played on your psyche in a certain way? There's a million different ways. Just like a million ways to break a bone, there's a million ways to have trauma, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. So I just want to get that before we start talking. Please abandon your thoughts of trauma, right? I know I probably froze again.
Yeah, you did freeze again, but I caught most of that. Yeah. So there's that big T trauma that a lot of us associate the word trauma with, right? So it could be something like child abuse, like you experienced that in your childhood, or big things like and violence and whatever, the things that we might normally, like an earthquake.
Yeah.
But then there's that little T trauma, which we all experience, and we all experience in our own way, because trauma is something that we experience inside us. It's invisible to other people, right? So what might be trauma to me might not be internalized in you as trauma. So, and you mentioned some of those things: divorce, breakup, car accident, pet loss. But even things like, and this is what stuck in my mind, because I'm actually reading this book right here called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. We're reading it in our book club on Monday nights with Christopher Rush.
That is a very thick book. There must be a lot of myths about being normal in there.
Oh my God, look.
That's a serious book.
It's a weapon. It's a weapon, I tell you. So one of the things that Dr. Gabor Mate talks about is, and other researchers talk about, is that, little T trauma could be something that, like, it could be experiencing racism, not in a big sense, but something that makes you feel like that was racism against me or discrimination against me. And that scares me, given all the things that are going on in the world right now. Like, I thought we got away from that mentality. I thought there were less and less people, or maybe they were dying off, right? Old boys club kind of thing. But they're not. I mean, racism, discrimination, social injustice, transphobia, all that is alive and well, at least for sure in North America, right? And these people, these young people that are, part of these marginalized communities, people don't realize it, but the way that they are being forced to experience life without that freedom of being authentic, that's causing more trauma in them. And who knows in 20 years how that's going to manifest itself in their lives,
right,
and how they're going to carry it forward in, if they choose to have children, or if they have children, how that trauma is going to be transmitted across generations. Right. And that's scary, man. That's not acceptable.
Right. And I think again, the first part of this is let's start looking at it a little bit differently, and demystify some of this, because there's still a lot of myths that surround this, and there's still a lot of stigma about talking about things that bother us or how we've been hurt. The funny thing is if you fall off a skateboard and break your arm, you walk around with a cast. You might be a little embarrassed that you fell off a skateboard and broke your arm. You might be a little embarrassed, but you know what? You're not like trying to hide the cast from people. It's just, it is what it is. It's a broken arm. But when people get hurt up here, when they get hurt up here in the gray matter, they want to hide that from people. They don't want anybody to know about it. It's like there's shame in mental injuries.
That too, yeah.
And the problem with that is that one small injury will now, since you cannot discuss it because you don't want to, hey, I don't want to be weak, or I don't want to be like, so now that gets stored. And what happens is every little incident that happens beyond that compounds it. So it's this cumulative value to trauma, where most traumas that people deal with that become very troublesome for them, the big ones sometimes are easier to deal with than the small ones, the little T's, because the big ones are so obvious. They're so obvious, but the little ones that compound daily, it's like if you stub your toe and break your big toe. Listen, in the scale of all the things that can happen to your body, a broken big toe is not that big a deal. But if you hit that broken toe every day, if every day you get up and hit that broken toe on a piece of furniture, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So you take something that is not necessarily horrible and it becomes life altering. Now you walk differently and you do things differently. You throw furniture away because you're afraid of stubbing your toe on it. There's so many things. It changes you. That's probably not a great example, a really good but I'm trying to make it so it makes sense.
No, it's a really good point, because you're right. So even these small t traumas that are invisible to other people, we've internalized them. Our body has categorized them as something traumatic. And so, here's an example. So let's think about the dating world, right? The dating world, somebody who's been through a divorce, even though it might not have been a hostile divorce, or someone that's had relationship issues in the past, maybe even as a teenager, their first love really hurt them, and that wound is still, almost raw. You'll hear them say things like, "No, I'm never ever dating again." Somebody in their 20s is saying this. Or you hear things like, there are no good men out there. They completely generalize. They sit in the corner. They don't want to socialize. They avoid situations. They gain weight. Part of it is because they're hiding themselves. They don't want to be attractive. And I'm I guess what I'm trying to say is that you mentioned that we change and it alters our lives. We also change in the way that we adapt to that coat of armor that we might have put on. And we adapt our behaviors, and we avoid situations. It attacks our self-esteem. So it can definitely cause us to completely disconnect from our feelings. I know for myself, I went through quite a long period of time where I was numb emotionally, like flat, right? So there was no major joy, but there were no major bad feelings either, negative feelings. And that was a defense mechanism for me because of some cumulative trauma that I hadn't yet healed. And it took me a while to realize what was going on.
Exactly. I could draw a line directly between a relationship I had that was very verbally abusive, and an argument automatically became a shouting match, which became a violent situation, throwing people out of the house, things like everything was, and it was like I developed like a PTSD type feeling, or I certainly was traumatized. Even if you play a role in something, you could still be traumatized by it. Just saying, it doesn't just have to happen to you. You could be traumatized by your own actions. I'll explain more about that in a little while, but you could be traumatized by the things you've done. Sometimes it's not guilt and shame. Sometimes it's trauma that we're feeling. So anyway, I went from that relationship to a relationship that was very calm and serene and nice. But the moment a disagreement would arise, I would immediately escalate to the level that I used to with the other person. And it wasn't because of the disagreement I was having. It was because I took that disagreement and put it upon the pile of the thousands of other ones I had with this other person. And now I'm reacting to everything, not just what's in front of me. So that can happen. And next thing you know, you're like,
Mhm.
well, now I don't trust myself to even disagree
Mhm.
or have an argument with somebody. So I start to shut down. And that's where I came to that point where emotionally I'm just not going to be available because I don't know how to do it right. And everything
Yeah.
hurts. Everything hurts. And so the only way it's not going to hurt is if I shut myself off. Now, again, I'm throwing away all the furniture because I don't want to stub my toe, but now I'm not comfortable. I'm living in an emptiness. Same thing with my mind. I couldn't deal with doing these things because I never dealt with that cumulative trauma that I had experienced. So
Yeah.
totally on board with where you're going with that.
Yeah, and you brought up something else that when you were arguing in that previous relationship and you immediately escalated to trauma, or sorry, to that negative or maybe violent or abusive kind of a way to deal
Yeah.
with it. That's something else that this book, The Myth of Normal, talks about. And they talk about response flexibility. You lost your ability to choose your response
Yeah.
because you immediately escalated to that one. It was always that one. There was
Right.
nothing else in your repertoire of potential responses to go from that place of victim to something else that might be emotional, vulnerable, or something else. But your response flexibility is diminished by the
Yeah.
trauma that you've already got inside you and adapted to.
Absolutely. And it's not like you become inflexible because you don't see anything but this major thing. It's not like
Right.
I'm looking at a little thing saying, "Oh, I think I'll overreact." That's not the decision I'm making because I don't
Mm.
see the little thing because so much of the big thing is still with me. If you don't somehow start to dismantle the beginnings of those traumas that have become cumulative traumas. If you don't start to dismantle those, I'm not saying you got to regress to childhood and tear apart everything you've ever done, but
Yeah.
let's start with this. Let's start with and saying, okay, I've got some trauma. Let's start with that statement and then see where it goes. But start to take that apart so that sooner or later, when I did finally deal with some of that stuff, I was able to now in the moment I could say, well, this ain't that. It's okay. A
Yeah.
good way to explain is we work with firemen, and firemen tell us all the time is they'll go to a car wreck, and there will be, in my excuse for the graphic nature of this, but I really need to put a point on it. A child died.
Mm-hmm.
A burned child's body is what they are dealing with now. And every
Mm.
firefighter there, almost all of them have kids. A lot of them have kids that age because it's just kind of that perfect storm of, how bad can this be? Let me tell you. You're
Oh my
looking at it and
God.
you're seeing your own child. And it's a huge trauma, but you get into the fight or flight, you fight. You're fighting the fire. You're doing this, you're doing your job, and you put it all aside. Then on the ride home, now you start to calm down. The adrenaline's going down, the cortisol, everything is changing, and now you start to react to what you saw. But you get back to the
Mm-hmm.
station, and it's like all of a sudden you're back at the station. Maybe you're having a bowl of chili, you're playing on your phone, or you're just trying to relax for a moment. And all of a sudden, the bell rings again. Now, this bell could be for a cat up a tree. But as
Yeah.
soon as that bell rings, what does that fireman experience? He doesn't experience, well, maybe it's something different. What they experience because of what they just saw is they experience the burned body, all of those emotions. When it's cumulative, that's what happens. It doesn't mean a trauma upon a trauma upon a trauma. It means a trauma with a reminding factor, I should say. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Something that reminds you of that
Yeah.
trauma over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
Of
So
that
every time
past
that
trauma.
bell rings,
Yeah.
until the firefighter can deal with that trauma of what he saw, every time the bell rings, that trauma comes up. They are, in a sense, not in real life, but in a sense, reliving that mentally and even
Yeah.
physically. So
Yeah.
now, even though you get there and there's a cat up a tree, and sooner or later you will exhale and you'll be okay, you've just added a percentage to that trauma that you had the first time. Now, if you go
Yeah.
for 6 months and you've got 6 months worth of alarms, and even if all of them were innocuous, nothing happened, you still felt that burning child. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about trauma, then trauma comes, then trauma comes, then trauma. It's trauma, and then it's something, it's a Pavlovian response almost. Something happens that triggers the trauma within you, but it doesn't have to be another trauma. Am I explaining that right, Mary?
Yeah,
Does that make
that's
sense?
exactly right. So a situation that reminds you of your past, of the past thing, reminds you of your childhood, if there was some trauma happening there. And this is
Yeah.
big T or small t, right? It's either. And it's just, sometimes it's hard for people to recognize that they have some unhealed trauma. And I'll give you a personal example for me. I used to brag that I can compartmentalize everything. Something bad happens, that's okay. I'm going to package it, put it in this box, and it'll be fine, and I'll never deal with it again, and blah, blah, blah. And I used to think that was my superpower. Now, yeah, I was an expert in it for sure. No doubt about that. But it was not a good thing. It was not a strength. It was not something to be proud of that I could compartmentalize. And first responders, doctors, other people dealing with tragic events potentially every day, they do also have the ability to do that too. I know my mom was a retired nurse, or she's a retired nurse dealing with cardiovascular patients. So she dealt with it all the time. So I'm like, yeah, I'm a mother's daughter, right? But that's not a superpower. It's not a strength. And so going through life like that, thinking that I was dealing with life in a great way by compartmentalizing, I was oblivious to the fact that I had unhealed trauma laying beneath, laying within, and really dictating my behaviors, dictating my reactions. So yeah, sometimes it's hard to, no, not sometimes. It can be difficult to recognize that we've got unhealed trauma within ourselves.
Absolutely. Hey, Christopher Roche is with us. What's up, beautiful people? Great to see your smiling
Hi,
faces.
Christopher.
God bless you, brother. Love what you do out there. You're a good man, good friend. Let me tell you, the compartmentalizing, that's something that we see a lot of. I did it a little differently, which I know a lot of people have done it the way I did it too, where it wasn't even as much compartmentalizing things. It was actually changing personalities. I was a one person when I was at work. I was a completely different person when I went home, a completely different person with my friends, a one person with my mother, one person with my father. And I actually felt wonderful about this skill. I was a chameleon. I could be whatever I needed to be in a minute. And if I didn't like how I was feeling, I would shift into something else or to be somebody else. It caught up with me one day when I realized I had no idea who I really am. And I had compartmentalized so much and moved all these personalities around so much that I even made up names. I was Sir Walter Scott over here. I was Mr. Scott over there. I was this, I was that. I had all these different things going on. I actually had this crisis of, who am I? And do I even exist? And then once you start kind of picking up the pieces, you start finding all these little traumas and these things like that. And it's like, well, no wonder I ran away, because I didn't want to deal with this shit. And I didn't want to deal with this. And I didn't want to deal with that. So Catherine's giving Chris a shout out. Yeah. Catherine Young wants to say hi to you.
We know each other. Yes.
Yeah. So we compartmentalize the lengths we go to hide from our trauma. And again, please, if you're just joining us, we're not using the word trauma like it's not like you're broken. It's not like something's wrong. Trauma could just be a simple little wound that is either new or festering. It's just any wound. Until you treat the wound, it's going to leave scars, and it could be bad. It could be infected. A lot of things can happen with wounds. Trauma is the same way. So don't, if when we say you have trauma, don't look at it like we're saying, oh my God, you're a mess and you're terrible. Everybody's got trauma in some
No,
sort.
not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and like we talked about the small t trauma earlier being that's something universal. That's something that many people have unhealed small t type trauma. And
yeah,
these are not insignificant things, but they do have, sorry, they may not appear to be significant, but they have significant impact on us and us going forward if not dealt with.
and I know you got a lot to share about what you're reading with your War and Peace version of mental health. There, that book,
Yeah.
it's a huge book. But before I want to turn that over to you, so we can start talking about things to do and how do we
Yeah.
start to recognize these things, maybe signs and symptomologies, those kind of things. I want to remind people that trauma doesn't necessarily have to come from an outside source. And this, especially working with people who have gone through issues with violence, with addictions, with maybe disorders, gambling disorders, or whatever it might be, whatever path took you down where you were doing things that you can't reconcile with yourself or that don't feel good to you, breaking the law when you were younger, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We can be traumatized by our own actions as well. Me being an addict and an alcoholic, and being a violent addict and alcoholic, and violent towards my wife and my kids and my family and a lot of people, that was trauma. It takes nothing away from the trauma that I inflicted on others, and I will never say that I did that, but I also have to understand that I traumatized myself too, because I thought it was guilt and shame. Not all of that was guilt and shame. Some of that was actual trauma, that I wounded myself by committing acts that were so egregious to who I want to be that I couldn't reconcile that. And the number one thing on any trauma is to own what happened. You cannot face any trauma without looking at the truth of what happened. You cannot face traumas or make traumas go away by saying, well, it really wasn't that bad, or that really didn't happen, and ignoring it. You cannot face traumas by saying, well, that happened, but it wasn't my fault, or that happened, but all the buts and all the things and all the excuses. That's not what we need. What we need straightforward. This is what happened. This is what happened. Now what? And that's where we need to go with that. Therese is joining us.
Wow.
Hey, Therese, thanks for joining
us.
Hi,
Therese.
I don't think there's one single person that knows all of my trauma. I was taught to keep things quiet, and sometimes still do. And, and Therese and I have discussed that on our show, The Exes, because, we're exes, but also best friends. And we've discussed that. And some of those things we hid from ourselves, which means we hid them from each other, which put a wedge between us as well. I mean, that was one of those things that happens. And you see that a lot in relationships. How can you possibly share your whole self with somebody when you're hiding part of yourself from you? So, so step number one, we have to see it. And, Mary, take it from there. Where else do we go with this kind of stuff?
You froze for a sec, so I didn't catch the last part of your sentence.
I was saying, we have to face it. We have to know the truth, and that's the starting point of any good treatment or any kind of facing it. Not all traumas require extreme treatment. Sometimes it requires just opening up and having conversations, but it still has to be about the truth of the situation, doesn't it, Mary?
Yeah, it definitely does. And like I said earlier, it's hard it can be difficult to identify, right? So first goal is identify that there's some things going on, and then poke into them and figure out if they are some kind of unhealed trauma. That's something that I had to do. And I'll go back to this book right now. So that's The Myth of Normal. And Christopher's in the book club as well. We're having an amazing time reading this book. So in this book, there's a checklist. And the checklist is like, it is not trauma if the following things remain true. So not trauma if these things are true. So number one,
Okay.
it doesn't limit you, constrict you, diminish you, your capacity to feel or think or trust or assert yourself, to experience suffering without succumbing to despair, or to witness it with compassion. So if it doesn't limit you, then it's not trauma.
Well, that's Mary Kay.
It
I will
doesn't.
say that's a slippery slope though, because a lot of people will say, "Oh no, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me," but they're in
True. And
denial.
there's more. There's more.
So that
There's
one's a
more.
slippery slope right there. Go ahead.
Yep. Slippery slope. So there's three more. So one
Excellent.
of them, another one is it doesn't keep you from holding your pain and sorrow and fear without being overwhelmed. Um,
Hmm.
you're not left compelled to either aggrandize yourself or to efface yourself for the sake of gaining acceptance or to justify your existence. So you gave perfect examples of that. You would turn into a different person for different people. Um, it does not impair your capacity to experience gratitude for the beauty and wonder of life. So that's a checklist. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, I certainly wouldn't pass any of those. Right? If I look at the trauma. And then there's more, right? So that's a doctor's checklist. Um, but I wrote a few things on, I have a list. Okay, so if you avoid certain situations, you might not know why, but you avoid them. So it could be social situations. It could be, um, I don't know, anything, interviews, something like that. You're avoiding something, situations. Struggling with self-esteem.
Mm,
Um, you experience intense emotions, or you're unable to regulate your emotions, or you're easily startled or jumpy at things.
mm,
Frequently feeling overwhelmed or stressed at things that other people might not see as stressful. Insomnia, the numbness we talked about that you and I have both experienced.
yeah.
You find it hard to trust people. You have a great deal of guilt or shame. Um, physical symptoms. So, physical symptoms can arise if something reminds you of that thing and
Right.
it comes up, like being bullied. I remember there was a time where I was being bullied at work. That brought me, although I didn't quite realize it at the time, that brought me right back to being 7 years
Yeah.
old and being bullied at school to a serious extent, like where I would get home, I was safe, and then I would lose myself in books, storybooks for years. That was my coping mechanism back then. But when it happened in my adulthood at work, these bullying behaviors, um, yeah, I didn't quite realize that it was physically manifesting itself in me. And even things like experiencing burnout and a breakdown 10 years ago now, I had to wait until it was physical.
Right.
I was diagnosed with IBS and pre I can't remember the word, pre-ulcerous lesions in my stomach.
Ah, okay.
And it wasn't until the doctor looked at me and said, Mary, out of all the list of things I've given you to do or not do, the number one is to deal with the stress. Now, he meant mental health, right? Get
Yeah.
yourself mentally healthy, uplift your mental health. So those are just some of the signs that could point to maybe there's some unhealed trauma that requires healing. And I don't want people to get um I don't want, like you said earlier, Scott, I don't want people to think that there's anything wrong with them, because
No. No.
if it's something that's internal and we've internalized it and our bodies and our brains are telling us to behave in a certain way because of it, then it's something that we can heal. It's within us. Anything within us, we have the power to deal with. We can't control what happens around us. We can't control a disaster or an earthquake or violence or crime or whatever, but we can control what happens inside us. So if we can get at the root of these unhealed traumas, then there is a path to healing, right? And that's really, really I mean, I hope everyone sees that as something that's inspiring and empowering.
You made several mentions in there about physical manifestations of these old traumas coming back and physically affecting us, and people might not understand.
Hmm.
I mean, we get affected physically by so many things. My daughter, who was just visiting, she had to fly out Saturday, and she doesn't like flying. She doesn't like flying, so
Me neither.
she was anxious about flying, and she did what she almost always does before she got physically ill and threw up the morning of the flight.
Yeah.
And she comes out of the bathroom. She goes, "Well, I didn't throw up too much this time," and it's like, well, what is that? You're having a thought about something, and it physically made your body vomit, reverse peristalsis. I mean, your body reacted like that. Listen, it goes back to Pavlov's dogs. You know, you're conditioned. Your body reacts to how it feels emotionally and how it feels spiritually in your soul and everything else, and it's all connected. So, you ring the bell, the dog drools, a physical reaction to a non-physical stimulus. Trauma is the same
Hmm.
way. You actually you can lose sleep. You can your eating habits would change. You don't feel good all the time. Headaches and stomach aches and
Yeah.
ulcers and all those things. Stress is not a physical condition, but it is an emotional condition that creates physical malady. So,
Yeah.
if you're carrying around
Yeah.
these traumas, if you're not looking at them, you're never, and I know this, I'm saying this for a fact for me. As long as you carry those traumas, you're never going to feel your best. You're just not. Physically, you can't, because
Well,
you're carrying darkness with you. You're carrying things that weigh on you, and it does have a physical manifestation. And sometimes that could be an extreme one if you're reminded in a way. A scent can come back to you that takes you back to that moment of
yeah.
trauma, and all of a sudden, physically, you can actually become almost in the same state you were during the time of the trauma. It can be, or it can be subtle, or it could be just little subtle things like I broke a sweat just thinking about that, or I lost my breath for a moment just
Hmm.
thinking about that, or I mean, I fell. I used to be a sign maker, and I fell, and I fell from a pretty high height, and I then became terribly afraid of heights. I never was before. I used to
Hmm.
climb mountains. Now, now I look up at certain things. Just the thought that that's high makes me physically woozy. I almost get vertigo and fall down. And I don't have vertigo.
Yeah.
It's just a
Yeah.
reaction to that trauma. So I know I went
Yeah.
on with
And
that,
that
but
absolutely. No, I'm glad that you did, because that solidified the point that thoughts can have a physical effect on our body in the negative. But the good news
but
is that they can also have the effect the other way as well, right?
tell us about it.
Thoughts. Well, I think that if you can find a way to, and I'm not just saying it's all about positive thinking, because it's definitely not. But if you can find a way to reframe something that happened in the past, um, and maybe reframing is a good one
Right.
to talk about, because if you can reframe that event, like for example, my ex-fiance leaving me, right, way back when,
Yeah.
that was my first real big relationship, and reframing it in the way that it was good, it was something good that happened to me. And once I started to believe that, and yes, it takes a while, it's not just all of a sudden you decide, um, I stopped having the reaction whenever I smelled his cologne somewhere, right? Even if I was in the store and a man walked by with his cologne, it would trigger that pain, would trigger that
Right.
pain.
Right.
And it would
Exactly.
trigger it in, heartache and anxiety and stuff like that. And that went on for years. But yeah, so the good news is that trauma internalized can be healed. It totally can be healed. Um, and you know what, maybe I'll get into some ways. Let me just find my list there. Some
Let me tell
ways
you,
that
while you're pulling out the list, I'm going to pull this up. Catherine's joining us again for a moment. Catherine says, I'm being
okay,
bullied
great.
now. I'm being bullied now too, Mary, and it's making me physically sick. Trauma. So she's
Yeah,
experiencing
you know
trauma
what,
now.
Catherine?
And yeah,
I was going to say, Catherine, you know what? Anytime you want to chat about it, I've been through bullying. That's one of one of the things that I can speak a lot about. Um, and yeah, we can talk through it. And sometimes talking through it is really does help because it identifies how you're responding to that and maybe some other alternative ways that you could respond to that within yourself, um, to get
yeah,
yourself through that. So, and just a reminder for everybody, Scott and I are not therapists or medically licensed professionals. These are things that we talk about from our own experience, our own opinions, and maybe some of our own research as well.
right.
So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there because I'm about
And we
to talk
both
about things that you can do.
and we both talk to professionals. We deal with professionals. We some of the stuff we're bringing you is stuff that's
Yeah.
been brought to us that we shared with you. We always
Oh yeah.
suggest, you know,
Yep.
listen, don't if one person tells you to do something, follow it up with a couple other people. Look around, always do research before you do something. And certainly if it is anything physical or even a psychological, if you want to do a deep dive into something serious, get professional help to do that. With a
Yeah,
situation
I
like
agree.
Catherine's talking about being bullied right now, and you could feel like the trauma is happening right now, that's where start with something simple like opening up to somebody, and it might help you put it in perspective. Because
Yeah.
if you don't do that, then you're going to have one person bullying you, the next person who says something, and you're going to take it like bullying, and then the next person, and before you know it, you feel like the whole world's out to get you. So make sure you open up, and by just saying it out loud
Yeah.
today, that's a start. That's huge. All right, go ahead, Mary Kay. What do you got?
Exactly. Yes, Catherine. Just saying it out loud is a huge start. So, some things that we can do. You already mentioned professional help. I mean, I think
Yes.
that's number one. That was the number one thing for me to get me going way back when.
Yeah.
Um, Joining support groups. That's another
Mm-hmm.
thing that you could do. Self-care, like physical exercise or other self-care things. Some of the things we talked about last week in our show. Um, Being around people, socializing, having people that support you, like your own group of friends, your tribe.
Yeah.
Brain exercise. I wrote down brain exercise. And what I mean by that is meditation, mindfulness. One of these might work for you. I know mindfulness was huge for me. It's a
Yeah.
number one tool in my toolbox. And for you, Scott, art, music, both of us, I mean, that's
Creativity.
huge in creativity. Yeah, creativity,
Mm,
exactly. And another thing is that many people don't actually mention is learning about trauma, learn
yes.
about mental health. Go out there, and there's tons of information and tons of studies, actual scientific studies that you can look up, look at, read, and then you can actually take these and discuss them with your doctor. I do that with my GP, and she's very open to anything. She's like, "What do you want to
Yes.
talk about?"
I
So,
think that's
yeah,
we
those are
have
just some of the
access.
things that we can do.
We have so much access now
Yeah,
to information,
yeah,
and sometimes maybe it's time to don't turn our podcast off, but maybe it's time to get off YouTube and go start searching some other things and stop watching TikTok for a little bit and Instagram, and because you want to get bullied, go on Instagram, but um,
yeah,
start looking at
or
some other
TikTok.
real, yeah, look at some real information and stuff, and look at things that develop your own interest. The creativity is really important. Look into
Yes.
different things. You mentioned meditation, you mentioned exercise. If you really want to hit the trifecta of mindfulness, meditation, and exercise, yoga is a great way to do that, because yoga is like full body meditation, and it takes focus, and it takes mindfulness, and it's
Yeah.
all about your breathing and being in the moment. Yoga is fantastic. And if oh, I'm not flexible enough for yoga, they do chair yoga where you don't even have to get out of your chair.
Yeah.
There's ways to do it. All right. Yeah, I know it's the ultimate lazy man's yoga. I get it, but I'm not saying go out and you got to do hot yoga tomorrow. Okay. It just it's something to look at. I would also like people to look into EMDR. If you do have some
Mm.
serious trauma, EMDR is, and I say it because eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was developed by Dr. Shapiro a long time ago, and it's based on the idea that trauma is stored not in one place, but in multiple places within our body and brains. If a scent reminds you of a trauma, and a sight reminds you of the same trauma, and a taste reminds you of the same trauma, those are all different parts of your brain, which means the trauma cannot
Mm-hmm.
just be removed from one piece. It must be removed from all those pieces. And when we talk about trauma being removed, we don't make it go away. Making it go away is what we've been trying to do, and that's what has been failing us miserably. It's about
Right.
seeing it, owning it, recognizing it, and putting it in its proper place. That's what it's about. It still existed, it still happened, but no longer do we have to continue to relive it. No longer do we have to react to the triggers that bring us back to that moment. Instead, we have our own ability to visit that moment with our thoughts and, to draw on our experiences, but it no longer controls our life today. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about making it go away. None of these things. Anybody that tells you they're going to make your traumas go away, I would suggest you go talk to somebody else, because they cannot.
Yeah.
If it happened, it happened. Sometimes it's just a matter of owning it and putting it into its real place and understanding that it is not connected to where you are today. That connection can be broken, but it still happened. It does not go away. And ignoring it is the worst thing you can do. Catherine
The
says,
relief.
yes,
Yeah.
EMDR helped her a lot too. I actually did EMDR because of the
Awesome.
violent nature of one of my past relationships, and that I had to deal with this woman because of children and
Yeah.
other things. And every time I did, I was so angry. The sound of her voice would trigger me into a rage, and I would just start yelling and screaming, being vile. And I had to put the trauma part of a relationship into where it belongs in the timeline, and let it stay in the timeline and not follow me everywhere. And I
Yeah.
did that with her, and it changed my life. So something that people can look into, EMDR. What else
Yeah,
what else do
definitely.
you want
And
to add to all of this?
well, excuse me. First of all, Scott, I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing some of your experiences, because I know that, anybody who's listening now or on the replay, that could really have helped them for their future, right? The
Right.
stuff that you were going through, and the person that you were back then, and look at you now, right? It's just, there's the proof is in the pudding, in both of us actually, and probably in everybody else that's watching the show today. um I think, one thing I'd like to highlight is that if there's some unhealed trauma in you, it's not your fault. Like, that's a big one. It's not your fault. That happened. And even if it was your behavior, right? There could have been something passed on to you from a parent.
Right.
Their trauma becomes your trauma in a different way, but it gets passed on. And so it's not a game of blame at all. It's a game,
Right.
well, I was going to say it's a game of, but it is a situation of, now we're here. Now you know that there's some unhealed trauma. And then now you'll investigate, okay, how can I heal this? What tools are available to me? Like some of the ones you and I just
Yeah.
listed. And there's hope, there is hope for all of us.
And I want to warn people about compartmentalizing your help as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell this person a little bit of this and this person a little bit of that. And compartmentalizing can go in an outward way too, where I've seen people do that. Well, I've talked about all my stuff, but I never told everybody everything. I told this
Mm-hmm.
person some and this person some, and that's, you're still hiding.
Mm-hmm.
Find somebody that you can trust.
Yeah.
Start with a friend and have honest conversations, and then certainly seek professional help when if you need to. But the only thing you need to let go of is the pain. you're not losing anything. You're
Yeah.
gaining a life by letting go of that pain. You're gaining a life. The only thing you're letting go of is everything that holds you back. And I know that's hard, and I know it doesn't feel like it at the time. And God knows, Mary Kay, and I'll tell you that we both went kicking and screaming into that good night of, you know, I'm going to hold on to my shit forever and screw the world.
Yeah.
But when you start to let go, when you start to release yourself from the bondage of our trauma and our past and all those other things, and you start to recognize the freedom of being present in today without shackles, without dragging chains behind you like Bob Marley, Jacob Marley. You know, Bob Marley's a singer. Jacob Marley. That was a good thought that went south really fast. Listen, once you start feeling that freedom, you don't ever want to be held back again.
Yeah.
But I know it takes kicking and screaming to get there sometimes, doesn't it, Mary?
It sure does. And like you said, it opens up, like, if you can just believe the one thing, it opens up so many other possibilities for your life.
Yes.
Like the universe just goes like this.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, once you realize that it's possible to heal, the world just becomes that much of a buffet for you.
That's right. That's right. And if you don't like buffets, you can get it a la carte. I don't care what you get. Just step up to the table and start enjoying your life, would you? Good Lord.
Oh my goodness.
There's enough trauma in this world. We don't need to hold on to all the old ones. There's plenty of new trauma around the corner. There's plenty of coffee tables and toes to be stubbed everywhere you go.
Oh boy.
The people who live happy are the people who can experience something, process it, own it, and then move on. And that's all we're asking you to do. So, wow, Mary, we flew by our hour.
I know. Wow.
Because, I mean, I love it. We talk about things like trauma and pain and everything else. There's plenty to talk about. If we were talking about rainbows and puppy dogs, the show would be over in 10 minutes.
No. I could totally talk on rainbows and puppy dogs for an hour. and goats.
And goats and moose and squirrels and all sorts of lions and tigers and bears. Oh, my. Well, you know what? Maybe next week, I'll tell you what, we're gonna look for a guest next week, but we're gonna focus on something happy next week. Let's see if we can find something we're gonna find something joyful for next week. So that way,
I think that's a great idea.
Be like a difficult thing. Let's go with some joyful things about mindfulness and being present and really just enjoying your life day to day. So that's what we'll be talking about next week, something along that vein. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Catherine, and Jacques, and Therese, and Sandy, and Karen, and Justin, my man Gio, and of course Chris Roush, and everybody else who's been tuning in and watching. We thank you, and we appreciate all of you so much. And we ask that you just reach out and tell us what you think about the show and share it with your friends. That's all we could ask. Right, Mary?
Yes, please share this out if this resonated with you, or if you think it can help somebody else. We'd love for you to share it. We'd love it.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we have come to the end of the show. Final thought? Do you have a final thought, Mary?
Did you just ask a question?
Yeah, I said, yeah. I'm sorry.
It's glitching.
With the glitch, you didn't get the inflection. I said, any final thoughts?
I didn't get the inflection. Final thoughts, I'll keep it really short.
Yes.
I'll keep it short. Get curious, get clear.
Wow.
That's my final thought.
And as always, I'm going to tell you and remind you that, great way. Let's start a new habit. Tomorrow, do one nice thing for somebody else, two nice things for yourself, and you'll never have a bad day. For now, I'm Scott J. And she's Mary Kay. There we go. And you've been watching The Life Between All or Nothing. We will catch you next time.
Good night.